Guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. Today, it's me, your host, Maria, and with me are my handsome bitches, Katie and William. Ooh, so handsome.
Hey
so
guys,
bitchy.
what's up? And what book are we doing today, Katie?
We're doing House of Leaves, by, I have it right here, by Mark Z. Danielewski, I think.
That book.
And this book is very well known. It's about 20 years old at this point, I think. It's like from 2000. And it is both a horror novel, but also one that very much takes advantage of the medium of the written page. In that, like, pages are formatted a little bit weird, and so it's very known for that reason. Like, there's notations at the bottom of each page. They sometimes go off topic quite a lot. There's appendices. Yeah, there's at one point there's just musical notes. It's supposed to denote that. So it's very famous for being weird like that. And I really like that in books, but also I think it can get really annoying very quickly. And I'm not going to say what happened in this book that I felt it was or wasn't annoying before I give my lovely co-hosts a chance to speak on their experience.
Two, basically, I guess, major points. One, for a positive reference, is that I thought many parts of it were very beautiful and spoke to me, and I thought it was really competently written and very, God, I don't know how long this took him to do, but, like, that's wild. And then on the other hand, there's, like, three, not themes, but there are three separate parts. One is something about losing yourself via schizophrenia, and then you can equal that to the story that is the horror story. But then you also have, like, a weird commentary on academia. So, like, even though I wouldn't say it doesn't work together, I wouldn't say necessarily that it feels like a I don't know, like, you get a cappuccino and it's, like, literally perfect in every regard. And not that I I don't even drink cappuccinos, but the point is like, like, everything works together in a way that complements one another. And I wouldn't say that that necessarily works in this book, but that doesn't mean that it isn't successful in ways. So I guess that's my feelings.
One moment, very importantly, Ellie Wells says, "My mom is watching the stream with me and she thinks Will is funny. She is one of the few, and I appreciate that
Thank
immensely."
You. Thank you, Ellie's mom. Will needs more of that.
One of the ways to think about this book is that, and one of the ways that I think of it is that this is like three books tied together, and two of them are excellent and one of them is horrible. And, like, this is kind of a common opinion on the book from what I understand, and I'll talk about it more. But one of these books actively makes the other worse, and it's super annoying.
So I'm kind of right there with both of you, where I think this book is trying to do a lot of things, and it succeeds beautifully in some of them, and then it very much fumbles. And I think part of it is, I think the author is trying to do so much that at certain points he is actively harming the bits that are really fantastic, in the sense that it becomes so convoluted, because, as Katie said, there's this critique of academia and academic writing happening, and as we talk about this book, it's going to be very apparent what that is. And on one hand, I get it and I chuckle, and on the other hand, he becomes even more convoluted, and there's so much. Like, we've read this book, but there is a layer of meaning, hidden things, secret stuff that he has hidden and packed into this book that it would take so much longer than we have and time to go into. And it would just take a lot of time being on the internet, reading things of the many forums that are dedicated to this book to figure out. And at a certain point, that cripples the tension of the story. Now, I will make an argument as we go on that I think part of this is on purpose, that he is actively trying to elicit a sense of frustration.
It actively gave me anxiety. That's what I wanted to just add on to. There's a certain point where I'm like, all right, come on. And, like, through that anxiety made me uncomfortable. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's not successful, but is it annoying? Yes.
There was one part when I'm literally turning pages, like the book, to try find
so
things. And I'm
It's
like,
a big book.
and I'm like, and it's such a big book. And let me tell you, I read a lot of this in bed, and my mistake was getting the frickin' soft cover version, so it's floppy. You're like, I'm in bed, and it's like doing this, and I can't tell you the number of times this son of a bitch fell on my face while I was reading, because I'm like turning, and then there's this one, I think it's footnote 167. I'll never forget it, because it's in the middle of the page, and I was like, where is this in the text? And I'm looking for it, and it creates a sense of frustration and an absolute almost insanity as you're reading, because I thought I had missed it, and it took me half an hour where I'd read, I was like, maybe it's going to be referenced in the future, and I'm reading, and then I realized, no, the footnote references itself. It's just a closed loop of nothingness in the middle of the fucking page. And I realized, oh, he's trying to be a dick. He was doing that on purpose. He's trying to make you, he's imparting a tiny bit of the insanity of
Yes.
Because there's two characters, or there's the horror story, and then there's a character actively delving into some insanity and some schizophrenia, and he is giving you I think what he's trying to do is bring you into the insanity of the book, because the footnote that I'm talking about is in the middle of a rather intense scene, or an intense stretch of scenes where some guys are in a not great situation and trying to survive. And so I think he's trying to heighten the frustration that he's trying to give you the frustration that the characters are having, that this one crazy guy's having. And he's trying to, but unfortunately, it saps the tension at certain points, because there are points where you're like, oh my god, give me more. Nom nom, baby. This is delicious. I love it. And he kind of crashes that at multiple points because all of the things are not working cohesively. Also, can I say this book deserves, the spear that cuts through water? It kept being like, this is a love story. This is a love story. Nah, bitch. The Navidson record is a love story. And yes, I love it. Let me tell you,
before we get too much more in, though, we should give the premise, which is that basically Maria will explain it because she's going to do it better than me.
So this book has, within the world of this book, there is a book that is being written and created as you read through it, and it is an academic analysis of a documentary called the Navidson Record, the Navidson Record? Yeah, the Navidson Record. And it is an academic analysis of the Navidson Record that reads very much like a classic academic textbook. You have different themes that it is bringing to this documentary that it is based on. And so it is a written academic analysis of a documentary. But on the outside of that, there is a man who has found the fragments of this written academic book, and he's putting it together. And basically the idea is there was a guy that died in his friend's building. He went into the dead man's room, found a trunk filled with the scraps of this book, and he starts collating it together to bring it together, because it was the chapters were all over, the footnotes were on different pages than the actual book, and so he starts collating it, and through starting to collate the book and bring it together, this random guy who just found this book starts going insane. And so within the footnotes of the book, you have, his name is Johnny Truant. His last name isn't actually Truant, but we're going to refer to him as Truant. And he leaves footnotes of his thoughts, whether it's about the weird stuff happening in the book or what is happening in his life as he is going insane. The other thing that Truant tells you, because he's kind of like the first editor of the book, is that the Navidson Record, the documentary that this academic analysis is based on, does not exist in his world. So in the world of the book, the documentary that this academic analysis is based on does not exist. And not only that, a lot of the references and works that the guy who died who wrote this book, his name is Zampano, that Zampano references do not exist. It is entirely made up as far as Truant can tell, and yet Truant ends up believing in the story of this book that Zampano has written. So you're going to hear us refer to a lot of these people. Again, Zampano is an old man who has died who wrote this book about a documentary that doesn't exist. Truant is the guy who found the fragments of this, is collating it, and through the book is we're watching him kind of go insane.
One way to think of it is like as the Russian nesting dolls, right? You
Yes.
have the Navidson Record, which we are hearing a description of from this book that Sapano is writing. And then from that, we have Truant collating all of Trapano's work. And then sometimes we actually get even material outside of Truant, like his mother's letters at one point.
Yes. And then there's also footnotes from the editors who have taken what Truant sent them, put it together, and then have then published it. And so there's like a lot of different author hands touching this. And then on top of all of it, you have Danielewski, who's just like... The other thing that I have to mention is Zampano's blind. So even if this documentary existed, he couldn't have seen it.
Ooh, how does that work?
Indeed. How does it work? How does this
And then at
blind-
one point inside the Navidson Record, we get an even larger doll that's somehow now in the smaller doll, but we'll get to that later.
When Maria was describing the incessant parts that like kind of interrupted the other parts and so on, I wanted to give it the tagline of skillful, not scary. Like, it kills the tension, but it's skillfully done.
And that's a very good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I will say the author is incredibly talented. Like, he can really write in a way that I didn't really expect. Like, the prose at certain parts are really great. He has, like, such a pitch perfect academic mode he slips into, and he's also really slyly funny in the academic moments. I just think that the way he wrote this is he threw everything at the wall to see what would stick and then forgot to sweep away the things that didn't stick, and so those are still there, and they kind of hurt sometimes the parts that are still sticking to the wall in this extended metaphor.
What I would say is that, so this is what I told our friend Steven last night when I was describing the book to him, is that I said, it's going to be weird to critique this book, but I guess the one solid critique I could give was that some of these annotations and some of these additions that we'll get into, like this one place where just names are mirrored and like it's just like writing. It's just writing. It's nothing that you're going to actually look at. So while some of the stuff adds an extra layer to things, which I understand is like, you know, like in the annotations itself, it adds like an extra layer. And then he combos that with just fake stuff that is just like bullshit that you just don't even need to read and you just like go past. And there's like an effect of that where it's like, I need to read this just in case I miss something, but at the same time it's frustrating. It's almost like gambling. And then when you, or like a scratch off, you know, like you go to scratch it off and then like it's just, okay, I lost the game. So like while I get why that contributes to that feeling of frustration he obviously wants to build, at the same time it is just words on a page. And I'm like, especially in some parts, such as the blue squares we'll get to at one point, I'm like, but why? What does this say? I'm not sure what this is saying to me about the mirrored effect that happens in there. So, like, if I can't figure out that message, then why is it included?
There's a lot of stuff. So, for instance, there's an entire part, and I haven't had a chance to look it up, where different paragraphs are numbered. And, like, 1 through 10 are kind of close together. And then all of a sudden, like, 30 pages later, there's a paragraph numbered 15. And I'm like, if you read those random paragraphs together, do you get a new, like, I don't know, because I didn't have time to do it because it was a bit of a mad dash to, between everything that was going on, get this done. Additionally, there's a part where it's talking about SOSs and Morse code, and then the paragraphs in the chapter have dots between them, and there's long paragraphs and short paragraphs. And so the paragraphs themselves then spell out SOS, and then so, which is, there's a whole point where the Truant is like, so, who cares, whatever. And then Truant's paragraphs in the footnotes spell out fuck. And so this thing is happening. And if you, the only reason I know that is I saw those dots and I went, what the fuck are these dots? And I did the Googling. I stopped. It was one of the times that I stopped and I was like, what is up with the dots in this chapter? And it was like, oh, the paragraphs are Morse code. There's long ones that stand for the dots and or that stand for the dashes or whatever the case is. And this is what they spell out. And so, but the problem is, and there are times where it makes sense to stop and do it. Like there's a coded letter from his mother that you do have to stop and understand. But to stop and do all of that as you are reading it, especially as a first-time reader, is almost impossible because it will kill any and all tension. The only reason the coded message works is because as you're unveiling the code, there's
Adds
literally
meaning.
a point where I was doing it and I got to one word and I was like, oh fuck, like, and so the tension was building as I was decoding. But even knowing that those paragraphs said SOS, so, and fuck, what the fuck does it add except another step to go and either do it yourself or have to look it up? What is it adding?
It is creating the mindset that Johnny Truant has. That is what it is. It's creating you. It is trying to elicit the emotional feeling that is, I'm sure, incredibly difficult to try to describe just via a character and its interactions, or just dialogue, or just description. Like, it's trying. I get what he is trying to do. That doesn't make it any less frustrating, but it is successful. So again, skillful, not scary.
I don't know. I think the parts of it that are successful are the parts that are less like that. I just don't really. And again, I like different formatting in books when the formatting itself, it's kind of taking advantage of books as a medium of physicality. But like, just parts of this just didn't work for me. I didn't feel like I was like, I see what you're trying to do there, but this is so far outside how books normally work that you're just breaking my immersion at this point. And it doesn't help that the Navidson record is like the most conventionally told part, and it's by far the best part of the book.
And another thing, because Chris M points out the chapter was named SOS, so the book was mirroring the story of the house. Now, here's the problem. If by mirroring the Morse code, it was giving a different message that added meaning, like perhaps it said help or hallway or like something or like a thing like that was going to happen later, like Tom, or that references something down the line that adds a little, like, a juicy little morsel. But for the text to just, like, for those paragraphs to just say SOS, which we are literally reading about in the text, the chapter is titled SOS. And so, like, and I understand the melding of form and having the form mirror what is happening, but you could have used that to do a little sprinkling. So if somebody got it, they'd be like, oh shit, I wonder what this is going to mean later. And then it becomes a nice little secret thing that they'll get later on, versus just knowing that the paragraphs spell out SOS, so, and fuck. Like, it doesn't add as much to the context, because if he had used it that way, that is adding. In this way, it is just like mirroring for the sake of mirroring, playing with form.
But that's what I'm saying. The only reason I say that is because of Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Like, that's my only other like understanding of schizophrenia and its like representation. And so those patterns, like, I get what he's trying to do. Does it heighten your reading experience? It does in one regard, but it doesn't in another. And I fully agree with you, Maria. But at the same time, this is what his goal was, and I get why he did it then, I suppose. I don't love it, but
the thing is, there are forums just dedicated. I found a website where a guy was going chapter by chapter and analyzing the different chapters, the text, the references. Yeah, the references to buttons that comes up, like the within the Navidson's record, within Truant losing all of his buttons and all of that. There's so much. So I think you're correct in a sense that, like, this effort for some people adds to the adventure. You get a story and a book, and then you get a scavenger hunt at the same time. It's kind of like
that's why the I Spy thing he puts in it.
I gotta be honest, I know there's a huge amount of, because I read through a bunch of theories about the book that other people have collated. I actually don't think this book is as smart as people think it is. I think people think this is the ultimate ARG. This is the ultimate, like, oh, there's a secret hidden meaning, you just gotta peel away the layers. I actually just don't think it's actually at the center of it that crazy, or there's the secrets necessarily lead anywhere. So it's like one of these things where I'm like, it's cool he did that, but I don't necessarily know that he always had a deeper purpose to putting in this scavenger hunt. I think he just put it in sometimes because he wanted to, and it's like you took away from the suspension of disbelief just to put in a scavenger hunt.
He took away the reader's experience for favor of the representation of a certain condition. And does that heighten the reading experience, and does that make it a good book? Not necessarily, but it does, I think, more experimentally and creatively attempt to represent something that is completely indescribable.
I don't know. You made the reference to Senua's Sacrifice, and like that is a game that spent a lot of time speaking with people who were schizophrenic and experts in the field, and getting feedback from them about making the main characters, the voices in her head, sound kind of real, and how those would really work. And I don't get that from this. I don't get that same sense of like, oh, I kind of understand how it works now. To me, it felt very much like, oh, he's a crazy guy, like kind of generically crazy, going insane kind of a thing.
Then Animus makes a point. I think it's less of taking the detail of the meaning at face value and the idea that in the back of your mind that the sound from the code is increasing as the house story gets intense. But specifically the one that I wanted to highlight was same with the chapter with the blue boxes. It's just ongoing noise that is there for effects that something like music would give in a film. And I think that is what he was trying to do specifically with those blue box chapters and all the stuff on the side, because it's like you're excavating all this extraneous stuff to get to the meat of this thing. So I think that it's what he was doing. And I found the blue box not to be the like most annoying one of the ones. The ones that I think were it wasn't great. For me it was the footnotes kind of in the middle that were like sideways, and the rest of the text was like normal that were a little bit more. And so I think that was one of the places where I could feel, especially because the juxtaposing of the architecture stuff on either side, like it created a wall. Like there was text on this side, text on this side, and then two windows. And so like I understood with the blue box kind of what was happening.
I think the whole point was that there was no hidden point. Everyone in the book was fighting to figure it out, and outside it, they're doing the same thing without realizing it's pointless.
It's schizophrenia, right? I'm assuming that's the portrayal of it, is that there is nothing, but you're trying to find.
That feels very like, the book is bad on purpose. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't really help you. Okay, so the other problem with this whole, it's supposed to be mirroring schizophrenia and all of that, is that this would all mean more if we liked Johnny Truant as a character, and we were really invested in how he thinks. Oh God, I cannot stand that fucker. He will not shut the fuck up. I agree.
He won't shut the fuck up, but I like him.
I have not hated a character this much since Patroclus. He is actively fighting to make this book worse for you. I don't hate him as much as Patroclus. There's no bounds for my hate for that fucker. But Johnny Truant is actively fighting to make the story worse. And so I'm really uninterested in like his fall into darkness, especially again because I don't feel like there's a lot of specificity to it.
That's okay. So that whole point where it's not, he didn't even exist and his mom just wrote the whole thing.
Yes.
Okay. So like maybe like not that I like this at all. Or like not that I hate it either, but I just don't feel either way for it. But like maybe that's why. I have no idea if that was conceived as to be a part of the I wonder if, like maybe that's why. I have no idea, because somebody, like, I read something about how a lot of the sexual encounters are very feminine in nature, or femininely screened, and how like maybe that was mom trying to picture what a masculine experience of sex might have been in hookups, and because like the dude that was writing it at the very least was like, yeah, this is not like necessarily how I have read / how I have felt about hookups, but it feels very romanticized, like a woman might write, and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Part of the problem is Science Fantastic has mentioned this. I think it was him that mentioned that the part of the problem with the book is there are times where you're reading it and you forget which parts are fiction or not fiction, and what parts the book thinks is real or not real. For instance, is it written by his mother, or is that again just another like the part where Truant's like, and I visited my doctor's friends in Seattle and I was better, and then he was like,
just
gotcha,
kidding,
fucker. You thought I was getting better.
I was really pissed off because I bought into it, and I was like, for a hot second,
I was like, you don't know doctors. Like, if you know doctors, they would have committed you immediately. Immediately, I was like, is he secretly? Because my only thought was, are you actually in a facility and you don't know it, buddy? Are we going to be like, I have to break out, and it's going to be mirroring your mother? So really quick, before we get too far into it, I want to do a little bit more of a thorough explanation of how the book works. So there's an opening, the introduction, which is written by Johnny Truant, and it is him explaining how he found the book and found the pieces. And as I mentioned before, he has a friend who lives in this building that Zampano lived in. Zampano was a blind guy. He walked around the courtyard, pet the cats. And when he died, it was rather mysterious, where there was gouges dug into the floor of his apartment that nobody was sure what happened, and yet he had no physical markers on him, so nobody's sure where the gouges came from. But after they took his body out, his friend Lude and Johnny go in to see it, and Johnny sees a trunk, and in the trunk is a massive amount of papers, paraphernalia, all having to do with something, and he for some reason takes it home. And he talks about his life as before that moment and after that moment, where because of this book, his life actively deteriorated. And there's even a point where the editors say, like, nobody knows where Johnny is anymore. He's just gone. And he basically says this book ruined my life. It could ruin, like, this story has an effect and it could ruin you. And it's kind of this, like, reader beware type of thing that happens.
You're in for a scare.
It's a mimetic virus that goes through knowledge. Very
Exactly.
Lovecraftian. As
like,
you understand it, it will destroy you.
Yes.
There's a good movie about that, actually. What's the movie called? Shoot. The Canadian people or whatever, and they spoken language turns you into a zombie.
Pontypool?
Pontypool! Thank you, my love. Yes, Pontypool. Great movie. Check it out.
The other thing to bear in mind about Johnny is like really a loser. He is very like he's on lots of drugs. He has like one friend. His entire life is about like meeting girls and having sex with them.
And doing drugs. Smoking
He
the bowl.
it's funny because somebody said beforehand the book, like, oh, I don't really like Johnny's chapters, and I was gonna be and so going into the book, my contrary streak was like, I'm gonna like him. It didn't last. Even you figure out something about his backstory at one point that's really tragic and sad, and I liked him for about a page, and then I was like, God, this fucker again. He's not a good person. He's not a charming person. There's nothing really interesting about him. So the fact that we have to, and the thing is, I think the author is doing this on purpose because the Navidson part shows that he really can write likable characters that are like not shitty. So
all of them. Every character in the Navidson record, I was so invested in. Reston, Tom.
Even Holloway. And you know what's funny is I kind of wish, so on that strain of thought though, I kind of wish, have this book, that's great and all, but can we have just a book of that? So that way I could go in and experience just that first.
Chris M. really quickly says, listen, at the end I would have read 100 Truant chapters instead of one academic one.
Chris M. says, I'm not saying I liked him, but he became comic relief. So my opinion of Truant is a little less intense than Will's. I very much disliked him at first, but as there's a certain point where once I realized that, like, kind of what was happening in his mind, I became a bit more invested. Now, there are points where he kills the tension of what's happening, and I'm like, I just want to go back to the Navidson record, please. But I did find myself at certain points kind of falling into the little narrative of what was happening in his life and becoming invested in that. I don't love him as much as, like, the Navidson record is the highlight. I just want to gobble that up. And I don't even mind the academic portions because I'm a goddamn sucker of an academic. And so I'm like, oh, I love this analysis of the Minotaur, Zampano. Why'd you take it out? And like, as much as I wish those sections were shorter, I like what they add. Like, there's things that they bring to it, but Truant is just he's disruptive and his sections have like this like violent punch-in quality, and Will makes one of the most the best uses of form in this book is the first time you're reading a Truant footnote that's really long, and then you turn the page and you think it's going to be the Navidson record, and then it's just more of Truant's footnote, and it's a bit of a like jump scare.
It really is.
You think he's done, and it's not. And it's one of the points where, every time that happens, you're like, there's a part of you that's frustrated. But again, I did find myself kind of getting invested in his story with his mother, kind of separately. But it almost is like two books, and I don't always know that they coalesce very well.
I agree. They don't coalesce. But that being said, I think the miserable fucking nature of Truant, and I think the degradation, and I think just the, like, you know, when you watch, like, Requiem for a Dream, that's his life. Requiem for a Dream is his life. And I think the misery of that heightens a certain miserable aspect of everything else. And so and also I vibe with the mommy issues.
Yes, for me it was the moments that you realized what his like there's this point where he's having a hallucination, and you read it the first time and you're like, weird hallucination, bro. Glad you didn't shit your pants. And then you read his mother's letters and you're like, oh shit. That was not a hallucination in the sense that you originally think it, and it adds some context. And I like that kind of stuff. But he does break the tension. But he finds the trunk and he basically tells you, reader beware. And then you start the Navidson Record, which is, or the academic analysis of the Navidson Record. The Navidson Record itself is just the documentary that this book is talking about. And so as you see, this is standard. This is formatted very standard academic book. You have like an intro quote that kind of gives you a little thing. There's footnotes at the bottom of each of the pages. As you can see. And so it's written very classically, and it like an academic book, it has the parts where it's directly engaging with the thing it's doing, and then it does that thing where it's like, now I'm going to talk about something not related, but that will thematically connect or bring some added clarity, and it has multiple points like that. And basically, the Navidson Record, because I need to explain this first, again, the Russian nesting dolls. The Navidson Record is a documentary created by a photojournalist named Will Navidson.
Yeah, Will Navidson.
And he is a Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalist.
Is it the Pulitzer Prize? I said that last night and I thought I was wrong.
No, it is the Pulitzer Prize. And he has kind of walked away from his career. He spent most of his life kind of going into these dangerous situations. But his life partner, Karen, basically told him, I'm tired of you going into dangerous situations. I'd like you to come and be a family man with me. God damn it. I'm tired of wondering whether you're going to come back alive. Please, after your last hurrah, can we just be a family? And he's like, absolutely. So they buy a nice house in Virginia. They move in with their kids, Chad and Daisy. Also, I hate the name Chad, which is not an actual reference, but like it's just how much the internet has ruined that name. The thing is, as a character, the little moments with Chad are just fantastic. Like I almost wish we got more of him. There's like some. He's the character who like I feel like had the horror hit him in a very specific way. Anyway, and they buy this house, and after like the first few weeks of living there, a closet opens up in between the kids' room and their bedroom where there should not be. There wasn't a closet before, and now there's a space, and it starts Will measuring, and he discovers that the inside of the house.
Can we call him Navi, because it's going to get really uncomfortable for me?
Yeah.
I was actually never sure if they pronounced it Navy or Navi.
Navy measures the outside and the inside of the house and finds that the inside of the house is 1/4 of an inch bigger than the outside of the house, which should be impossible, especially given that there should be like the walls in between. It should be significantly smaller. So this 1/4 of an inch really rattles him, and he kind of becomes obsessed with it. Karen, who like this closet pops up, she's like, I don't like this. And she just immediately starts trying to like cozy her way into comfort and like builds bookshelves with a friend.
I wanted to add on to Karen's thing. Karen also, just as a prerequisite, not that I'll go into anything crazy because you know her history gets revealed throughout the book, but she's like kind of like model-esque, and she's kind of like trophy wife-esque in a certain way, only in the sense that she's very beautiful and she always puts on a good face. And she truly does, and it is established, she truly loves her husband. Like she is almost maybe, depending on whose perspective you consider, obsessed with him in a traumatic, like, I need to attach myself someone way. But that's also arguable depending on who your narrator is.
Basically, he brings in some friends to help look at the house, and as they're, and like, he brings in his brother who like does construction stuff, and he's like, your tools are probably shit. Then they bring in their friend Reston, who is a an engineer in a like renowned university, and then his stuff is also, and not just that, but when Reston comes in, it actually is like 2 inches off where it's bigger. Like they're finding more. So then out of nowhere, and so this is basically a haunted house story. A door opens up in their living room on a wall that abuts the outside, and when they open it, it is a hallway. Now, this is one of the moments where the academic portion added to the reveal of this hallway, because right before you get to this hallway, so you have the whole first part of the book is telling you what I've just gone over, but also analyzing Karen and Navy's relationship, the moments that they're with each other versus the moments that they're not with each other, how they're looking at each other. And it is very much establishing that at the heart of what this academic analysis is doing, it is also highly looking at the love and the relationship between these two people. So it's establishing that. It's looking at all this stuff. But then it goes on a tangent about echoes. The myth of echo, the sound theory of echoes.
I kind of liked that though.
I
because
love
then,
it. No,
like, yeah.
This is me defending. I fucking love the
Continue.
echo portion.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, I fucking love it, because you're sitting there and you're like, why am I reading about echoes? And then it's talking about how you need distance and massive amounts of distance for there to be echoes. And then it jumps back into the story specifically about how Navy's in the kitchen or the living room, and all of a sudden he hears his kids' voices echoing when they shouldn't be echoing. And he finds that closet that his kids are in, kind of back and forth, but when he gets there, it's only it's a specific length. And the echoing, because you've just read about echoing and distance, and then when he sees it, it shouldn't have been big enough to make the echoes. And then there's a later part where he closes it, and as he closes the door, he hears the click echo in the distance, and when he opens it, it's significantly longer. And so this whole dumb academic tangent about echoes lulls you into a sense of, okay, I guess we're talking about
safety.
Echoes. Safety in the academic jargon of what's happening, and then you hear that click and the echo, and you're like, oh shit, it's really big.
That was a useful usage of the academic references that I thought was very, if we were gonna say, oh, we need to cut some things, and we don't need this schizophrenic representation, blah 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 blah, or whatever, and you would cut things. Yeah, this is an example of how this usage of this non sequitur is just actually useful, and it actually adds to the atmosphere.
I skipped it.
Yes, it will skipped it.
Right before this, the author gives you permission by having Johnny say, I couldn't bring myself to cut out any of the Zapano parts because of blah, 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 blah. But if you want to, you can skip them. And so I was like, oh, the author knows. That being said, I like that it's in there. And I read the beginning portion and the end portion of it, and the ideas of echoes as, if you don't hear an echo, that's actually scarier because it means it's so far away. An echo is a measure of distance, and that's important in some of the creepier moments later. It informs them. So I like that it was there, but I also think you can skip it, and you're not gonna miss that much.
I enjoyed it. I think you can skip it, and I think I told Will that. I was like, I've read everything, and I did. I read this book, except for the Pelican poems and some of the I read the quotes. Some of the appendices I didn't read completely, but I read some of them in depth. But for the most part, I did not skim this book. I engaged with it. And this is one of the most effective uses of the academic analysis in the middle of the thing. Because, Katie made the comment that this is going to, it's a critique of academic analysis. Number one, the funny thing about this is it's all fake. The Navidson Record doesn't exist. So all of this academic analysis that he's referencing doesn't exist as well. And so it is the convoluted nature of academia and the need to analyze everything to death, even when there is nothing to do so about it.
Was I the only one who thought that it was real? It was just real in a different world or something like that? I never thought that it was completely fake. I just assumed that it was okay, this book is creating itself in a different universe, and then the house is creating itself, and I never assumed that it was fake, which is that just Johnny was in a different universe from it. But I think I'm the only one who thought that.
No, you're not wrong. I went back and forth on that, and I didn't really care, and I just ignored it from then on out. But that did occur to me.
For me, the reason I don't think that I think it's not that is the point where he wanted the information about the different photography, and he had that one lady just point at a photography magazine. He would point at it and she would describe the picture and he would choose whether he would include it or not. And it's that sense of, because a lot of the time in academic books, they were like, for further context, please reference, and then they'll list out a ton of things that nobody's going to sit down and reference. And even most of the time when I would read academic journal articles, I didn't have time, and you didn't spend a ton of time in the footnotes. And at no point was I like, let me look up this footnote.
Yeah.
Is it real? When you're reading, there is a sense of trust in the peer review process. Most of the academic journal articles I read from my academic career were peer reviewed, which is somebody had to go in to the thing that they're citing, read the paragraph and make sure they're not misconstruing it, saying something that isn't there, whatever the case is, quoting it correctly, and that's the peer review process. And as a reader, trusting that peer review process, I was not double checking every single footnote for its validity. I was not looking up a footnote to do further reading. You just read the thing. And for me, it felt like Zampano was trying to engage in a form of communication that he had never actually engaged in or done. And so there's a point
but
where
wanted to make it more a reliable like resource. And so, like, mimicking the effort of it.
Yeah, so he mimics the form of an academic book. There's a part where he lists a ton of architecture. It is just on either side of the page, like a separate foot. Instead of being on the bottom, it's on either side. And it's just a ton of architecture that he's telling you to reference in the term of the architecture discussion he's having within the text. And it is such an inane amount of references to architecture that none of it, and every once in a while, and I'm sitting there because I'm a fucking potato, scanning each of it to make sure there's not a hidden message written in it.
Yes, I know.
I did that too.
And
You're not the only one.
I was like, oh my god, and you're insane because you're looking for something that isn't there, just like the characters in the text at that time are looking for something. Like it's insane.
By the way, did you guys read any of the photographs? The notes in the photographs?
I read the one page that was a different ending. Okay,
I want us to talk about that because that haunted me.
I don't think I read that one.
It's a different and last page.
There is a verb specifically that haunts me. The verb used to describe something, and I'm like, oh, that is horrific.
It's really wild. But he is definitely making fun of, I think, the trust we have as readers in academic books in that the footnotes are real and actual the person has read it. And so, because the thing is, you kind of trust Zampano as a researcher prior to the point where Truant meets with one of the, because he was blind, he would dictate what he wanted, or he had a bunch of women come in and they would read to him, or they would type out what he was dictating to them. And so one of the ladies was like, yeah, that whole section, I just gave him stuff and he wrote it down and we included it. Like, he just had me look at a magazine, and it immediately, your faith is shook in Zampano as a narrator.
Not for me. That's so funny.
This is a mimicry of the belief of the delusion. That's why. It all mirrors itself, which is almost why I wonder if that's why he included like the weird like mirroring square text that we'll get to at some point. Like it's all an echo of itself. And so again, there's repeating themes. Now, whether or not that makes the book clean or not, obviously it doesn't, but it is all like replicating itself in a weird, almost like fractal pattern, not unlike the 5.5 or whatever minute room.
The short film at the beginning.
Not unlike the room itself / the hallway / the other dimension.
The inner part of the house.
Which is like the next big plot point that kind of happens. I mean, again, we get a lot of the background of the relationship between Navy and his wife. I liked all of that stuff. It's very interesting. The children read as very realistic. Navy and his wife read as very realistic. But what happens is that they find, like Maria said, a basement.
No, not a basement, just off of their outside wall.
Right.
So it shouldn't be there, because if you stand on the other side of the wall, it's the backyard.
I just think of it as a basement because, like,
yeah.
But and it leads into just a dark hallway with rooms of its own, and they slowly there's all this tension between Navy, who wants to go experience it and figure out what's going on, and he has that lust for adventure, and his wife, who's like, no, this isn't our house, I don't like it, don't, if you go in there, Navy, we're not gonna be happy.
She's like, I will leave.
She's neurotic about it because you will later learn she has PTSD. Now, whether it's true or not, who knows? But I tend to believe that that is a true account, at least within the story itself. That what she experienced, which was a childhood abuse, occurred in a small, dark place. And so
She has claustrophobia for.
and so like I'm sure what's showing here is her empathy and her love for her husband, because it's like, I don't want to lose you, and regardless of whether or not we have a haunted hallway, I don't want you to go into a space that terrifies me and makes me have seizures, because then I certainly can't rescue you, and you will go away and I'll never find you again, just like that part of myself I lost when I was a child. And so that's like a really also like it makes sense.
Because he can't go into it, he starts bringing in people to go into it for him to kind of look around, and he starts putting together like a crew, and he hates this a little bit.
So actually, I want to go back a little bit before that. So he has one, the first time he goes in is such a creepy scene.
It is!
Because he goes in on his own when he's not supposed to with his wife, and he finds that, like, everything is kind of shifting around. The doors don't quite add up correctly. He gets to a big hall and he says, like, he calls and there's like no echo. And this is after the part with the echo, I think. And you're like, oh shit, that means it's so far away. And so I right now am in my horror era, as we've decided, right? I'm reading a lot of horror books to find what I find is scary and try to find a book that's scary. And so far I haven't been able to find it because I think just fundamentally I can't be scared of
Pet
text.
Cemetery was kind of scary.
It's creepy, but I never found it scary. This though got very close because it felt like someone describing an analog horror series, and me like I was remembering all the analog story or analog horror I've watched that I found scary. Analog horror is like a YouTube genre of story that's like fake news stories recorded on like analog machines, kind of like that's the genre of it. And so this book actually precedes analog horror as a genre, so like it's not referencing it, but I felt like it was referencing all the ones I've seen. Or
I think we can say that this is part of the lead up into analog horror as a genre, because I'm sure this is foundational for a lot of people who are into horror and this kind of thing. I feel like this is probably something they read, so I don't think it's too much of a stress to say that it's part of the legacy, the
Genesis
of analog horror.
Because analog horror is very found footage kind of a thing. And so like this part I did find creepy. Well, another weird thing I found about horror books is they all insist on having two timelines that make the others, one timeline making the other one less scary. Like this just is a thing that's constantly happening. And that's kind of how I felt about Truant in this book. And this is about the point where I started to hate Truant, because you're like, okay, what's going to happen next? And then you get a cliffhanger of Truant being like, and this random sentence made me think about a thing that was happening in my life. And he literally says that.
And I'm so hot for Thumper. I want to fuck Thumper. There's a stripper named Thumper. I'm picturing her naked. Oh my God.
Happiest place on earth, baby.
It's so annoying. This is the part where it really starts to work against the and part of it is, so there's this thing like in video game design where if you're going to have a companion character, the studies show that like you should not have them ever need help. Like that immediately makes the player like them less, because the player came there to have fun, and taking care of somebody is not that much fun. And so like regardless of their story actions or dialogue or whatever, you'll start to dislike them because they get in the way of your experience. And Truant is like that. He's getting in the way of the experience you want to read of what happened. And I didn't find, so even though I found certain parts of his story compelling at times, again, the author is very talented, this is the kind of the genesis of like, he's actively a roadblock. He is actively cock blocking you. And I didn't like that at all.
I would agree. This is around the point where I started kind of struggling with him. I was like, just shut up, buddy. Like, come on. Now I started getting a bit more on board. So, because he starts, as the book starts to infect him a little bit as he's dealing. So I want to say less that the book is infecting him, but that there's something about this book and this experience that is
bringing to the surface,
affecting him,
yes.
Not infecting. It's affecting him, and bringing to the surface a lot of things he hasn't dealt with. Because there's a lot of things about like the dark rooms of our minds that we shove things in and do not touch. And this book, by the unlocking, because there's a lot of anxiety with the door. There's one part where the text basically says, and all of the problems with Karen and Navy's relationship is typified by this hallway. He wants to go in and explore it. She does not want him in danger. And the two forces are absolutely opposing. So it is the dark hallway, or the dark room of their relationship that they never have actually dealt with.
Oh,
that
like
is
a metaphor.
Open. Yes, and for
Oh.
Truant,
Who
the
would've thought
dark
this?
hallway and dark room of his mind that he doesn't deal with is a lot of the trauma in his past, some of which he has completely forgotten on a conscious level, but subconsciously is still back there. And so there's this idea of the house, the hallways, the back rooms, as people in our comments have been referencing it, as an opening to the dark things you do not want to look at, but specifically that aren't, like, there's nothing actually, like,
There.
there.
That's the whole point of the backrooms.
But that the very existence of them is harming, because there is when Navy first goes into it the first time, he hears a growl. There's a point where he gets to one point and then things start shifting and there's this guttural growl echoing off of everything, and he's like, hightail it out of here. But he made the mistake of going in with nothing, and he was like placing stuff, I think it was his buttons,
Yeah.
on his coat to try help him, and he almost doesn't make it out. He's very lost for a second, and then gets out and is like, oh shit. And then that's when Karen's like, you are never allowed to go back in there ever again.
She doesn't catch on to it until incredibly long later. And when she finds out, that breaks her faith in him.
Really quickly, Ben had a point that he said that, to me, that's where the academic writing style really works. The dryness and emotional detachment make it feel like the scary thing is really happening and not just someone trying to spook you. And I fully agree with that. Like, it sets out such a detached, perfect, realistic tone. And, like, that distance, too, from the characters makes you fill the gap.
And because the academic voice is taking it seriously, it's kind of that thing where the voice of authority can lead you to, you're lulled into a sense of this did happen. This is real. This highly educated academic voice is engaging with this as if it is a thing that happened, and so you are lulled into that sense. Again, there's literally a point where I looked up something because I thought it was real, only to end up in a forum titled, this thing got you too. We're all here because we looked up a snuff movie that doesn't fucking exist. And because some of the references are real. Some of the references a lot of the references this book makes are real, and a lot of them are fucking fake. And it's just, this book gets you.
It's also a question of specificity and realism, in that the realism of it makes you go, oh, okay, this is a real thing. Like, that's just, it's like how authors include details in their descriptions to prove that this is a real thing that really happened. So like if a movie is shot in a way that is like okay, there was a fake documentary on Netflix a few years ago called American Vandal, which is about, it's shot like a perfectly straight, like a pitch perfect documentary, exactly accurate, but it's a guy at a high school exploring someone or trying to figure out who painted a bunch of penises on cars, and like that, and it's so funny for the first 3 or 4 episodes because it's just a pitch perfect, it's exactly, they have like recreations of it in 3D models, and like he's having interviews with people and nobody's like, this is ridiculous, everybody's taking it super seriously. And so like that has that sense of realism, but instead of a comedy, it's a horror, and you're like, oh, okay, this feels very, very real. And so yeah, I think that's something where the academic nature of it really helps. And even like you get something for like the whole part about the echo, for example. I think that's a case where like, yeah, you lose a certain amount of momentum in the story, but it gives it that realism, which is a good trade-off. And I think also the thing about it is that one of the reasons the academic things bothered me less is because they tended to be better paced in the story. So part of the problem with, so there's this basic story structure in fiction, which is A plot, B plot, meanwhile back at the farm. And you see this in TV shows all the time. But the thing is, you have to know when you can switch from one to the other. So the academic parts tend to take place in like a more relaxed moment where you're like, okay, I want to cool off and think about what happened in the house. And so you like read that for a minute. Whereas Johnny's is intentionally cutting you off on a
Disruptive.
cliffhanger.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's kind of part of the problem.
And I'm going to use another academic thing that actually got cut but works in the book, because there's times where Zampano cut stuff. He said, like, I don't want to include this, but Truant, Johnny, put it in anyway. And it is right after Navy hears the growl the first time is the Minotaur portion, where it talks about the labyrinth, the Minotaur, looking at the Minotaur not as like an actual monster, but a disabled or deformed person, and the relationship between father and son, misunderstanding, coming to terms with. And the idea of what's his face being a villain rather than a hero. The guy who kills the Minotaur? Theseus. And it has this whole thing, and it does a lot of things. Number one, you're like, oh man, there is a growl. Is that a monster? Is the Minotaur the monster in the labyrinth? But then all of a sudden it's talking about the Minotaur as something to be sympathized with, pitied, and then also this is around the time where you realize Zampano has a son that's gone, that he doesn't know what happened to, and you're like, oh, Zampano has guilt. What did you do, buddy, about this? And all of like that stuff is being set up, and I think it's right before this, but I have to talk about it. There was a random footnote where Truant, and this is one of the ones where at first I was just so pissed that he had interrupted what was happening, and he goes on about something, and then Truant talks about how, because he works in a tattoo shop and his boss doesn't actually think he's good at sketching, but he makes real good needles. There was this one point where he goes into the back. He's not having a good time, and he started having hallucinations of like things, like he hears growling around him. He also, like Zampano, all of the walls in Zampano's house were like the windows were covered, the vents were covered, everything. Like he created a closed off space. And Truant had started doing this as well, covering his windows, covering the vents, all of that jazz. And as he starts having like these weird hallucinations, and there's a specific one he has where he's in the back room at the tattoo shop filling up paint, and he hears the growl, and then there's this moment where it is kind of attacking him, and he shits himself and pees himself, and he's very he's ashamed of it in the moment, and then he has this moment where he gets to like run away from what just happened, and he trips and falls, the paint goes everywhere. There's this point where he loses himself because his arm is black and the floor is black, and he has this derealization moment or depersonalization moment where he's kind of, but luckily there's some blue on his other upper arm, and so he's able to see his outline again, and he's having this moment, and everybody comes at him, and he's like, why aren't they talking about the fact that I shit myself? And then he realizes he didn't, and he's like, oh god, that was weird. That ends, and then there's a footnote underneath that very long footnote that is the editor saying, Mr. Truant's stuff is often really random, but if you'd like some context, please read his father's, what is that thing called?
Obituary and
his mother's letters. The other thing I should mention is in an earlier one where he's having one of these bad hallucinations, he hallucinates the truck crash that killed his father, whom he loved very, very much. And it is also, as much as Truant's scenes are terrible, the description of this car wreckage, this truck wreckage, is absolutely visceral and fantastic. And like realizing that his father died in the truck, burning, it's just intense. But anyway, and then you have his mother's letters. The obituary works to give you a little bit of context for him, but his mother's letters are one of the best portions of this. Oh my god,
book. They are so horrifically good. They actually ruined the rest of the book a little bit, because I was really into the Navidson Record. Then we switched to reading about his mom's letters for like a half hour, and then we go back and I'm like, no, I'm still emotionally affected by that. Yes. I don't want to, it's a moment where they're so good they kind of fuck up the pacing. Basically, his mother is in an institution when he is 10, I think.
And I think he was 7. He was young.
Yeah, he was real young. And after his father died, and she's writing him letters, and she is and it's worth pointing out, up until this point in the story, we haven't heard anything about her. The only thing Johnny has said about her is she was a weird Shakespearean lady. And that is actually reflected in her letters, in that she writes in a very sort of Shakespearean kind of way. And the way they're written is just so artful. They feel so pitch perfectly like a somewhat abusive, manipulative woman, but who is also just alone and loves her son.
A
And like
ton.
when he doesn't write back to her, she gets kind of passive aggressive about it. But at the same time, you get such a depth of feeling from her of like she is alone. This is the only thing she has in the world. But also you get the sense that yeah, she is crazy, to use the common term. Like at one point she starts, like you can see her slowly start beginning to think that the staff is working against her, or she'll mention like, oh, they weren't going to let me write for a little while because I did something weird, but whatever. And you slowly are drawn into the emotional stakes of like how she talks to him, her madness, but again how much she needs him, and like that to me was just so affecting. And this is the part where there is that code, which is that again she's like, I don't remember what she has, but I think it's schizophrenia, but I can't quite remember. Right, where she thinks that the director of the institution and everybody is in a plot against her. And so she's like, we have to figure out a way to communicate in a way that, yeah, her name is
Persephina?
It's something Spanishy, isn't it?
Pelafina. Okay.
And in this letter, she's like, okay, the next letter I send, I'm going to be making it in a code. So you have to put the first letter of each word in that sentence will form a word. And I Googled it because I was not going to sit down and do that. Maria did it on her own. And that letter is such a gut punch. That is one of the places where this book doing a wacky thing really works. Even me reading it on a forum. Because basically she says, I am being assaulted nightly with an R.
A 56-year-old bag of bones. Why would they do this? She goes, there is no worse, is one of her sentences. There is no worse.
And she also talks about herself in the third person a little bit. Like, they R-word your mother. You have to get me out of here. I'm so scared. Some people have theorized that this is not true. I think... my opinion of it is that it actually doesn't quite matter if it's true or not in terms of the narrative. I tend to think it is true. It's just not a conspiracy. Abuse against elders is like a very real problem. And, I think that also cuts a middle ground where we don't just go, oh, she's crazy, we can't believe her at all. But it is such a... God, it's such an affecting part. And then it ends with... You guys can talk about your views of it in just a second, but it ends with her... going like, oh, this whole time there wasn't a new director that came in and was evil. It was the same guy. I just got kind of mixed up, because she has a moment of lucidity where like she's more lucid because they got her on different meds, but she's slowly kind of going back. And she the thing about it, and the reason I felt so much sympathy for Johnny is he's being mistreated in these other homes, but there's a sense that like she really wants him to save her because she has nothing else. But you feel as a child like, God, that's so much weight to put on it. And eventually she kills herself, and because she says like, there's only one way for me to leave this place, and you didn't get me a bag to leave, so I'm so tired, I'll just go on my own. And yeah, and then she kills herself, and you're just like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no, it's super affecting. So I did decode it. Katie, did you decode the letter, or did you look it up?
Yes, by myself. I did it all on my own because somebody on the internet said you had to.
I did it as well for the first half of it, and when I hit because they spell out the assault word, but the grape one, and when I hit that, because you're not really understanding what you're decoding, you're just putting and I was like, and then you're like, it hits you, and I'm like, oh my God,
she's not rapping.
Like, and it's just such a visceral reaction in that moment, like, it was one of the moments where discovering it myself and decoding it myself was just so impactful. And then after that, I was like, I need to know what this says immediately. And so I just ended up looking up the rest of it. But it is one of the moments where I think it, like Katie pointed out with the echo portion and some of the other stuff, it adds, like, it is actively adding.
The scavenger hunt adds and helps
to the experience. It was super shocking. The other thing is, in this, Pelafina apologizes for strangling young Johnny, and that was the moment that his dad came in, saw this happening, and that's what put her in the institution was her hurting Johnny. And you also discovered that earlier, because Johnny has these like scars on his hands, like these terrible burn marks, that he spends a lot of time lying about how he got them. But it happened when he was even younger. His mom was cooking and she knocked a pot of boiling like oil and it burnt him. And that he doesn't have a negative connotation, and he remembers that experience, but he does not remember the experience of his mother choking him. And one of the things that she talks about is he ended up with a cut on the back of his neck from her nails where she did it. And she talks about that she had a moment where she thought, life is so hard and terrible and awful, and if I can barely handle it, how can my child handle it? And it would be kinder to just kill him. And you realize that the moment that, because she talks about how he pooped his pants and peed himself out of fear in that moment, and then you realize that that thing that you read earlier at the beginning when the guy told you to go back to, that is actually him having a reliving of that moment with his mother in being personified as the weird growling creature from the house. Mm-hmm. And it is just such a visceral moment of realizing, because like I immediately finished that, went back and reread it, and it was like, oh my, because there's a part where he talks about somebody was like, oh, you have a cut on the back of your neck. And I was like, oh, shit.
Her letters really set the tone going forward, too, because it's funny because Johnny will mention things that are kind of analogous that she mentioned in her letters, but aren't quite but he'll never actually say that she said it. And so it makes you feel very smart as a reader that like, and also that like he has cut that out of his life. The whole idea, too, of her wanting to kind of give up his life because it was going to be too hard is kind of one of the themes in the book going forward too. And so again, I feel like this is a place where like he could have put this in the main page drift or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But it's better that you had to flip to the end of the book to read it and then flip back. That, again, that scavenger hunter portion really worked for me in a way that like so much of this book doesn't. There are parts that stick to the wall that he's throwing everything at. It's just that not all of them work. But this is one of the ones I did. And again, it kind of ruined it for me for like a good 10 minutes because I was like, God, I don't know why. That just really struck me. Maybe because especially as I get older, I see more and more kind of the difficulty of getting older for people, not for me, but like for people who are like at the end of their life and how that deals with their children and all of that.
Yep.
And so like it really struck a chord.
This scene happens and then it leads into what Will was saying where she was like, I'm better now, but you got to send me a suitcase so I can come home. And then you get the letter from the Institute saying she died. And it's just like this really hard moment. And then Truant doesn't talk about his mother for a huge chunk of it is only towards the end that he starts talking about her, and you're like, this is such a wildly specific thing. Also, through his mother's letters, you learn about his abusive foster father, and how Truant is like, he goes to Alaska, he goes to Europe, he's doing all of this stuff to try escape, and it is just like it gives you a bit of an idea because this entire time all you have heard is Truant telling lies about his scars, his past, what he has done, how he got here, and you get these bits from his mother. I also want to touch on something that Will said, which is how much she loves him. He comes to visit her, and the letters afterwards, the amount of love, how happy. She just thinks he's the most beautiful, amazing thing on the planet.
I have so much sympathy for her situation, and then I had so much sympathy for Johnny, which, again, only lasted about a page or two before I was like, God, can you stop describing having sex with these women? Which we'll get to.
Did you find him better once he stopped having sex with women?
It doesn't really. It keeps going. He keeps having sex with all these different women, and it's described very viscerally, and you're like... why is this in here? And again, it's not even described. It's not even like they're not bad sex scenes in terms of, we read a lot of bad sex scenes. These have a good sense of atmosphere. They're supposed to feel kind of grimy and gross, and they do achieve that. But it's just like, why is the... I really do feel like Johnny's segments where like the author read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And you're like, that doesn't quite work.
So a bunch of people read the letters at the end. Like they didn't read it at that footnote. Now,
really?
My quick question, yes. did you see the footnote and choose not to go read it, or did you not see that footnote and just read past it? And also, what did that do to your reading experience of these scenes? Because I feel like it's so integral to understanding Truant during. How was that reading experience? Because all three of us, right, we all stopped and went and read it at this point.
Yeah.
There's a part later with Holloway, actually, where, like, I read a little bit... They said to go forward to read a thing, and then I read a little bit farther, which I think is you're supposed to, kind of. And you figure out about his ending, which then influences how you read going backwards, but Maria hadn't. So, like, it's interesting how that can change your...
No, I read the exact 2 pages they told me to, and nothing farther.
No, I got impatient at one point, and it's funny. I told my husband I was reading in the car because I read this straight 8 hours straight.
Jeez.
Oh my God.
Yeah. No. I read this the first half 8 hours straight, and the second half 8 hours straight.
Holy shit.
So it took me literally a total of approximately 14 hours because I had 2 hours to spare in the car. And when I was reading it, I started getting anxiety around the point where literally they start going and doing their explorations. And so when I get to the point of their of the letters, I didn't even write out I started writing out I'm talking about Pelafina's letter. When I started writing it out, I got irritated because once I got to 56-year-old bag of bones, that's really hard to figure out what the fuck that says when you're just writing letter after letter.
I couldn't get 50. I was like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, no. So I didn't really understand what that was. So I gave up and I just like pretended that like line didn't exist. I saw the RAPE word though, and I was like, okay, I get the point. And so I kept going and I did the rest of it all in my head. Because like I just couldn't be bothered to write it down because that was more irritating. And once I got that, I was like, okay, well, like how much more do I have to go in this fucking book? And so I started looking through the back stuff, and I got to Holloway's stuff, and I'm like, oh, what's this? And then I started reading that, and I thought to myself, maybe if I read this now, I'll have less to read later, which makes no logical sense.
Which makes no logical sense.
No, not at all. But I was like, okay, but that means like, because when Maria showed me earlier on, she's like, yeah, I looked back and I read the letters, but I'm right here, so I really only have this much left. And so I was like, maybe I can do that too. And so, but like, jump the gun. And so I started reading a whole bunch of stuff, but it was out of context, and I was like, okay, I give up. I'm just gonna go back. But yeah, no, I read it in that, and I definitely don't think I would have skipped it because it literally is one of the few reasons you can empathize with Johnny.
It adds so much context to him.
And again, all the stuff with his foster parents just being awful, and again the emotional weight of living with a parent who is unwell, and like, what are you supposed to do? You can't save them, and she's putting so much weight on him, and
you can't rely on them at all, and you become parentalized in a way, but for their emotional health. And so the letters though are a nice buffer, at least. The problem with the letters though are like that's the only source of light he has, which he later describes. Andy, stop it! Sorry, the old man dog is angry at the baby dog for trying to play with him. Truant later on says like that these letters actually were one of the few reasons he found the wherewithal to run away from home from his abusive situation and stuff. So like, it's funny. I like the mystical quality his mother provides in her letters and the beautiful stories through which she tries to comfort him with, is a balm to his childhood neglect / abuse. But as he gets older, and we get that like when like during like this climax of a point later on, but like it's funny how that childhood mysticism of somebody you don't really know but is supposed to be connected to you and loves you so much evolves into an anger once you're old enough to understand the advantage they took over you, whether or not they meant to or not, and the loss of control that like that provides. And so I think that's portrayed really well through his like thing. But again, you can't experience that unless you read those letters.
I think the word you use, beautiful, is such a good way to describe it because those letters are beautiful. She writes beautifully, but it's beautifully crazy. And I could see also how like with a parent like that, they're both magnetic. And there is something to that magneticism. Like one of the things I find, even just in real life, is that I'm often drawn to very high energy, mentally ill people because I get to like live through them a little, like ADHD kind of a thing, because it's like I get to live and be a little bit more. I'm so like closed off and all of that, but like I could see how as a child you both are attracted to that, but you need the dependency that you have from a parent, and you're not getting it.
Especially one who's just absent, and who is this? Because one of the points Truant makes later is he doesn't remember the day his mother choked him. He vaguely thinks he remembers a cry, a shout that he thinks is his father, and then realizes it was his mother, but he does not remember. And so he actually thinks that she actually wasn't choking him that hard, and actually maybe she didn't even do it, and his dad just. And yet we all, like, you read the scene where he relives her choking him, and there's this point where it's just this black face, and it's the eyes. It describes the eyes that he, like, as a young boy, staring up into his mother's eyes, and the terror he felt in that moment.
There's this one description too that I really feel like really anchors it into a reality, even though it's like something small, is that it's described that she has really long knife length acrylics on, and as and that's just like a very specific kind of mom that like it is it not? Am I wrong? And that's a specific kind of mom.
It is. And
it's purple nail polish of all things, which I think is a very seductive color. And so I even think the color itself, sort of like in a weird way, it's a mystical color, as opposed to say yellow or green. Yes, what are you gonna say? I see it.
It even matches, and I forgot until you mentioned that, but he describes in the tattoo shop when he's reliving it, he describes them as claw-like hands. Like, they're these claws. And it really, like, because I forgot that his mom had the long fingernails that were purple until this moment. And so it's just...
Because she describes them cutting it later.
Yeah, it's so insane how impactful. And so what I'm seeing is Chris M. and Bananamus both saw the footnote and were like, that's for later. And then Jessie lost her pen, just didn't see the footnote and wishes that they had read it. And so I'm really fascinated by what the reading experience is. Bananamus did say they were able to like still relate and see how much the child is traumatized and understand the mental illness in his childhood and in his family. And so I just think that is a wild, because I didn't even think that people did that. I was just like, everybody just reads it when it happens. So it's really wild.
Science Fantastic has a good point. Miss Truant is the Minotaur. So that's what I was saying before with like everything kind of fractaling itself. It's the same thing. Like, depending on how you want to read it, you could literally read all of this from Truant's perspective, although I certainly don't. I see the Navidson Record as like the major anchor point. But if you were to read it from Truant's like major narration point, like all of this is literally just a metaphor for him dealing with the disease his mother passed on to him, but not being able to figure out the fear he has, the core childhood fear, which is just, and he can't figure it out, hence the metaphor of the maze. And within the maze of not knowing your like parentage, like the mother being the scary beast in the middle, it's because that is the thing that made such an impact.
And there's points where she writes letters where she's kind of mean, and she's not necessarily mean, but she's manipulating.
Passive-aggressively
and she's upset that he hasn't responded, and then he writes her a terse letter in response, and she's like, how you cut me, I didn't realize you were in Alaska doing a fishing boat. The other thing that I want to say is, the entire time, and I think I spoke to you about this, Will, but his writing style does not match, in certain moments, the background we've been told about him. And so at first, I was like, he gets weirdly lyrical randomly and makes weird references to stuff that I don't think he should know about. Yeah. And then you read
He even uses French. Did you see that? French and Spanish.
Yes, he uses French and Spanish because she did. And when you read her letters, you see all those weird writing quirks that are random, because most of the time his writing is very like, and then I was thinking about Thumper, and she had this tattoo, and da-da-da. But then all of a sudden, he hits this lyricality, and you're like, what the fuck? And it's Palafina. He's, like, mirroring his mother's writing, and it's just
Or he never lived at all, and it's just Palafina
the whole time. Which is freaking crazy. Anyway.
Amazing. And the Minotaur is the death of her son. Like, again, it can flip back and forth.
You also have old Zapano. There's a lot of stuff about parents and children in this. Navidson has a bad relationship with his parents. Karen has a bad relationship with parental figures. There's a lot of...
Oh, God, yeah.
And there's also the sense of the book as a baby. as a child needing to be taken care of, and Truant taking on the role of a parent and collating it and bringing it, and then all
Nice.
of like that. There's a lot of like parent stuff. Zapanyo's son who is lost, who he like, is he dead? Is he just lost? But he misses him. What is this? And so there's a lot of intricacies like that. And then you finish this whole thing with his mom. And then you go back to the rest of the book.
The Navidson Record, where at this point, we've barely even touched the surface of the exploration.
What happens in the rest of the Navidson Record is he brings in a group of people, Holloway, this guy named Fred, I think it was Zed, and then Ward.
Jed,
and they're
close.
Jed,
Close.
Jed,
Jed.
thank you. And is
Wax.
the third? And Max. And
Wax, with a
Wax.
W.
Yes, there we go. These three are going to be the people going in and adventuring, and like they're using fishing line, trying to make sure they don't get lost. Navy is very upset that him's not the one going in to do the heckin' exploring.
Kind of like a dick measuring contest between him and this Holloway guy. And picture, what's his name? The guy from Tarzan. Clayton is Holloway. Wax is, I think, supposed to be Asian. I don't remember. But he's like, I want to climb Mount Everest and come down it all by myself, and I'm that skilled that I probably could. And then Jed is like, I'm here. Like, that's all I remember.
And he's a nice guy
him.
with a fiance back home that
that's
he really
all I
likes,
remember.
and who microbrews stuff.
Yeah, that's
like,
all I remember.
He's
is his
just a
wife or
nice
fiance or whatever.
He's a nice chill boy, and he likes talking to her a lot. But they start doing expeditions, and there's multiple expeditions that they do. The first is they go find the stairs, and they start trying to, because there's this one like giant atrium, like there's this one point
the Great Hall.
The Great Hall they refer to it as, where it opens up, and in the middle of it is a staircase going down, and they start going down, and they don't have enough and to go down, and on. I'm gonna just breeze through a ton of stuff. Also, in the background, his kids are having weird reactions to things. The kids are making weird drawings of the house where it's just a black square taking up the majority of the page.
And then creatures in the border as well, like tigers in like a menagerie.
His son, Chad, stopped spending time inside the house and is outside getting into fights a lot, which mirrors Truant as a young child dealing with all of his childhood abuse, just getting into fights a lot. And so there's a lot of this stuff where the stories are mirroring each other, which work. But again, sometimes Truant's just taking up too much page time and it doesn't work. And on the last big expedition, Holloway goes down with the Jed and Wax, and it doesn't go well. They go all the way down to the very bottom of the stairs, which takes them like 4 days of climbing.
And it's 10 miles, if I remember correctly. I think originally it was something like 10 or 12 miles that they had to traverse downstairs.
Because you first read about it from the point of view of those on the other side, like waiting for them. You have Reston and Tom kind of manning the radio waves and listening for them, and then like everybody reacting to the point, because there's suddenly a point where the line goes dead. You can't hear them anymore. And then there's banging, like this banging that turns into, which they read as a Morse code for SOS.
Is it in the kids' room?
Yes, the kids hear it first, I think. But it happens enough that they realize something. It's number one, it's been like 6 days. It's been too long. Everybody's freaking out about this. And there's this banging happening. And this is Navidson's moment. So prior to this point, he had gone in by himself when he wasn't supposed to. And Karen found out about it. Also, Karen is obsessed with feng shui right now. She's trying in whatever way she can to not
so
deal
funny.
with the fact that her house is haunted. And she keeps putting feng shui stuff
Good for
all
her,
over the
though.
place.
Like,
Yeah.
imagine, though, in a world where, like, magic actually does exist and what she does actually does keep it at bay. Who's to say? Like, maybe it did keep it at bay. We don't know, because later on, the freaking room eats it up. And it just, like...
Yeah, that's true, actually.
Disappear. So maybe they actually were combating the negative energy.
Things get real bad after that point. So she's trying her best to be practical in whatever ways she can be while not dealing with it. But when they realize the party, the exploration party is in trouble and they need to go in, Navidson is like, it's my moment. He's ecstatic. He gets to go in because there's nobody else. It's him, Tom, and Reston have to go in. and he's so fucking pumped. Another thing that's happening in the background in the academic portion is it's studying Tom and Navy's relationship. They are twins, but Navy's the like fit, good-looking one, and Tom is kind of chunky, and he's just like chill and like he's
He's
Tom
been
is
like
living
an
it.
alcoholic too
Yeah.
at times, and we haven't talked about it, but like it's one of the cutest parts of the book is their relationship and kind of rekindling from the estrangement they had, and everybody likes Tom, and the book even talks about everyone who's watched the documentary likes Tom more than they like Navy.
Tom's like the teddy bear, and Will Davidson's more like the razor blade artist.
Yeah.
I was gonna say
Like-
the
like-
Wolverine bear.
Their relationship is just so like the moment when they finally get past the like there's this point where he's like you could have called and Tom's like phones work two ways motherfucker, and it's just like it's like this moment because they've had all this tension and Tom's so good with the kids and we love Tom in this household.
Also, Tom just like wants to smoke weed and eat lemon meringue pie. Like, you know,
He's so I love how much they mentioned the lemon meringue pie.
he brings it up like 3 times. When they go off their rescue mission, Tom's too scared to go down the spiral staircase. Understandably, he gets like nausea and almost like passes out. And so the wheelchair dude and Reston and Will go down. Navidson goes down the stairs, which actually, and this is like a fun little part too, is that, you know, originally it was like 10 to 12 miles or something like that. To the effect, the point is that it took the original team several days to get down it. Whereas when Navidson comes in, he had already been in the space, and so he knew there must be an end to certain spaces, or it's something to that effect, the way the explanation goes. And so when he goes down the stairs, he expects it to have an end, whereas Holloway may not. He's like, oh, is this an endless staircase? Or all of them were like so scared that they're like, this is endless. But Navy is like, no, this has an end. And so it's only like 2 flights of stairs or 3 flights of stairs. It's like 10 feet.
Yeah, it takes 10 minutes.
Yeah, like it's not that very far. So even despite that though, so luckily the wheelchair guy can go with him because it's not very far, and so they go off to go like on the rescue mission. But meanwhile, Tom's just smoking weed in his tent, like making shadow puppets like like Mr. Monster.
Because he's terrified of this Minotaur, but he's trying to deflect it with humor, and the book even talks about like, oh, he tried to deflect it with humor while Holloway couldn't. And also, I have to say, Tom is genuinely funny. There's a joke about a penguin that, like, if you've read the book, you remember because I found it hilarious.
It is so dumb.
It's so funny. I laughed out loud.
It took me off guard so bad because I was like, where are we going with this joke, Tom?
You genuinely find it, like, really funny, and I'm not sure why.
Because we get the Tom tapes, which is just him by himself hanging out at this, because he stays at the top of the staircase so that he can be the radio hub that will connect the house to everyone downstairs, so he can and so that becomes his job. It was supposed to be Reston's job because he's in a wheelchair, but as Katie mentioned, because it was so short, they could Reston just slid, like, went his way down, and then they took his wheelchair down. But the Tom tapes are so, and there is something to be said for like how you interact with negative things or like with things that scare you, like, and deflecting and diffusing with humor in Tom's fear versus how other people interact with it. And also, like Katie mentioned, so because they knew the exploration party got to the bottom of the stairs, that was one of the last radio signals they got from them. Katie's right. Navidson knew that there was an end to the stairs, so the end ends up coming really quickly. And there's just a thing about how you interact with this space and how it interacts with you that is just fascinating throughout the book.
I will say, and this happened earlier, but as soon as Holloway and the gang show up, I stopped really being creeped out by the book. There was something about it that just became so clinical that it was hard for me. A lot of horror is vibes, and if you're approaching a monster from a clinical, detached point of view of like, let's study this thing, all of a sudden it becomes a lot less scary. Like when he goes in on his own, that was so much scarier to me than like, I like kind of what happens with Holloway and stuff, but like it just didn't, it stopped being as scary to me, and it became a little bit more of a puzzle box.
They go down to do this rescue mission, and once they get in there to a certain point, we start getting the experience of the guys that went down. And one of the things, because we get the tapes from Jed and Max, or Wax, and Jed, there's a point where Holloway kind of starts going crazy, where he brought a gun with him, and there's the idea of Holloway as the hunter looking for the beast, not just as an explorer trying to get to the end of something. And there's a point where they hear the growling, and the Jed and Wax are like, we're just gonna go back. And Holloway is like, no, hunting time. And they end up separating, and then we get a whole bunch of the academic stuff about mutinies that happened historically, the Hudson mutiny, and then those two Spanish guys. They go off on their own, and there's a point where they come into contact with Holloway again, and Holloway shoots shoots Wax, and Jed has to like drag him along, and there's this point where they have to abandon their fishing line, their neon markers, and he's just running for their lives into
There's a
this
degradation
cove.
there too. There's this one specific part where Holloway shoots him, and he's like, oh, I didn't know it was you. But instead of just being like, oh, it was an accident, let's move past this, he's like, oh, I shot you. That means I have to go to jail. That means I'm, and then he just like jumps to the worst case scenario. Oh God, sorry. Anyway, he jumps to the worst case scenario, and it just keeps spiraling and spiraling. So he's like, no, I must go off into the darkness. Goodbye. And then he like Phantom of the Opera's away until later, which we'll get to in a second, where it really fucking killed me.
Jed flies off with Wax, and he's trying to keep Wax alive. Wax is going into shock, and there's even a footnote that gives you the 3 different levels of shock. That is very wild. But there's this, so we know that Navidson and them are on their way to rescue, and there's this point where Jed is sitting there and he's pounding on the wall an SOS, asking for help, because he's run out of steam. They've run out of water. He knows him and his friend are going to die. He has not abandoned Wax, and he's banging, and that's the banging you hear in the walls of the house earlier. And then there's a point where they're sitting there. It's been like a day after that. We don't actually know time, because the house is this gray ashen space with no actual light and no sense of time passing. But there's a point where suddenly there's a banging happening on the wall opposite him, and Jed is terrified, what is coming at him. And we as the reader are like, God, I hope it's Navidson and the search party.
But you don't know that yet at that point, because they haven't yet gone off on the search party.
Yes, but you kind of hope that somebody is coming for him. But then we go to the actual search party, and they're going through all of this stuff, and there's this point where they hear crying. They hear a noise, him and Reston, as they're going through these different points. And Reston's like, it's on the other side of this wall, man. And Navidson's like, how the fuck are we going to get to the other side? Because there's never been this idea that there is another side, like that you can access rooms outside of the doorways that are just naturally there. And they just start beating the wall down. And when they get through, God, it's such a good scene. It's
wait,
good.
Wait. I'll find it real quick, because it's
so good.
It's the way it cuts that really makes a difference.
And this is one of the most affecting scenes in the book for me, especially because I did not read into the Holloway portion at this point, so I did not know what was going to happen. Holy fucking shit.
Okay, there we are.
So this is insane. And I literally flipped the page and flipped back.
Yeah, I know. I was really angry when this happened, because I was super stoked that he was being rescued. Hold on a second. I'm in the middle of this.
I will say that we should mention that at this point, the way the book is formatted, it's just like one paragraph at the bottom of the page with a bunch of blank space. And like, I actually found that to be a trick that I think worked. Like, after a while, it does start to feel it's like, it's A, not super noticeable, but B, it does give you a sense of just like strangeness. And there's a part later where Navi is in the dark and you feel like there's just nothing.
Also, the claustrophobia portion where the text gets tinier and tinier. Oh.
And also, it's like stanzas in a poem, right?
Yes.
Like those pauses. Like did you guys read the House of Leaves poem? That one really hit me really hard. Like, I mean, I feel like that's the thesis of the book. And anyway, so yeah, this is the part. So on this bottom page, we have this, and it says, the whole sequence amounts to a pretty ratty collection of cuts alternating between Jed's high 8 and an equally poured view from the 16mm camera, and Navidson and Reston's high 8s. Nevertheless, what matters most here is adequately captured. The alchemy of social contact as Jed's rasp of terror almost instantly transforms itself into laughter and sobs of relief. In a scattering of seconds, a 33-year-old man from Vinland, New Jersey, who loves to drink Seattle coffee and listen to Lyle Lovett with his fiancée, learns his sentence has been remitted. He will live. And then on the next page, it says, it has as diligent as any close analysis of the Zapruder film, similar frame-by-frame examination carried out countless times by too many critics to name here, reveals how a fraction of a second later, one bullet pierced his upper lip, blasted through the maxillary bone, dislodging, even fragmenting the central teeth, and then, in the following frame, obliterated the backside of his head. Chunks of occipital lobe and parietal bone spewed out in an instantly senseless pattern uselessly preserved in celluloid light. Ample information, perhaps, to track the trajectories of individual skull bits and blood droplets, determine destinations, even origins, but not nearly enough information to actually ever resemble the shatter. Here, then, and then it cuts off.
It is such a, because you were with Jed as he was contemplating his death previously and building up to this and kind of coming to terms as he's trying to keep Wax alive. And so you're so happy in that moment when he's because again, and it gets you because it's talked about his wife in the Seattle coffee previously.
I know.
So it gets you. You're like, yay, he's gonna. And then as a reader, because you finish that paragraph at the bottom and then you go to the top one, and it's so smart because by putting it at the bottom of a page in a single solitary paragraph, you think, okay, we've wrapped up this scene.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start this new thing, and you're like, what is this analysis going to be about? And then it's a bullet straight
going through his
face.
fucking skull.
Yeah.
And I literally dropped the book. I was so shocked by this cut. And it's one of those moments where the weird formatting is doing so much good. And as Chris M says, and Jed is the good guy you root for because he's just the goodest guy.
He was like, he didn't cheat on the dude's wife. He, like, it doesn't matter. It's so negligible in the story.
Yes,
but the point is he's not Wax. He's not Holloway. He's not Navidson. He's just a chill dude. And then also, initially when I read it, I thought that meant that Reston had shot him. Because I didn't know, as we were about to be told, that Holloway is down this. Oh, it's a really cool sequence. But he's like down a hallway, being able to view this, and he shoots him for some reason. Although, like, I guess it's later like logic to that. It's like I have to kill both witnesses. Which is so dumb. It's just it's a degradation of like self and like logic and stuff. But yeah, I thought it was Reston at first, and I was like, why did Reston shoot him? And then the next thing I'm like, oh, it's Holloway.
So I had the same thing as Bananamus, where when it first described the bullet, I thought it was about something that happened with Wax's injury. Like, I thought it was Wax who, and then I realized no, because like I had to reread the whole 2 pages. Again, they're not two whole pages, they're just a little bit. I had to reread them completely because I was like, what the frick just happened? It was such a visceral moment, and it is so good. Anyway, they rescue the boys. Well, they take Jed's body. They rescue Wax, who ends up living but just fucks off, and he never climbs mountains again. And he never goes in caverns again. He's like...
and he gets erectile dysfunction for a little bit, the most tragic
He
part.
does! It's very sad. I saw that too.
I know, right?
Also, when Holloway, when this happens, they have like a mini shoot-off between Reston and Holloway. And all of a sudden, like... a series of like, I mean, I can only imagine like a dozen or so doors just slamming back to back to back to back, which is weird, don't you think? That
because there's no doors.
No, but just not even just that. It's protecting.
Yeah, the houses.
Yeah,
acting.
Isn't that weird? I thought that was strange that it was like protecting them from Holloway.
I thought it less about protecting them from Holloway than the house was taking Holloway back into it. I read it completely the opposite, where the house was re-enveloping Holloway and slamming the door from them so, like, as because he starts going backwards and the house just kind of slams the doors on, like all of these slamming doors around it. So I took it the opposite way. And the thing is, it's written in a way where I think you can read it either way, but that's just the way I took it in that moment, was that the house was re-enveloping him and slamming the door like, we're not done with you, honey. Like, you're in our grasp.
You're ours.
Yeah.
That's so interesting because I read it as suddenly the house providing a barrier for them to escape through.
And the thing is, I think you can read it either either way. That's one of the weird things about this book is how you interact with it. But coming up is one of the most terrifying quarter of my life. And it is, they get to the staircase and they have to get, and also, let me just say, the greatest moment of Tom slander on the planet. Tom is waiting. He's done his thing, and he gets a message from Navidson saying, Tom, I need you to meet us at the bottom of the stairs. We have Max. He's hurt. And Tom goes to go down the stairs and he can't. So he runs back to the living room where Karen is. And Navidson gets there and Tom isn't at the bottom of the stairs waiting for them. And Rustin's like, what do you think's happened? And he's like, old Navidson family motto, Tom always fails you. And I was like, fuck you, Nate. Especially because as he says this, rope comes down and Navidson has created Tom has created a gurney pulley system, so they can put wax on the gurney and then pull him up.
Smarter instead of harder.
Like he understood his limitations. He understood his limitations, but did not let that keep him from helping. And it's just like such good, and it's also so real because sometimes you just can't make yourself do a thing, but you do your best outside of that. Like fear is fucking crippling. But Tom saves the day, and they're pulling Reston's body up. So they get Wax up, and all of a sudden they start hearing that growling noise, and there's the sense of change happening. And as they start pulling Reston up the stairs, it starts growing as they're doing it.
And the rope gets taut.
Yes, and they just managed to get Reston up before the rope completely snaps, and it just goes and goes up. And the way that Tom had been communicating with Navy that he had gotten them up safely was he'd drop a quarter to let him know, okay, let's do the next thing. And the quarter that drops when Tom gets Reston up to where Navy is now takes 54 minutes of falling, which means the stairs are now 54,000. It's bigger than the circumference of the earth.
It was so creepy. I've never been more creeped out by math.
Dude, that part was actually by far the creepiest part in the entire book, in my opinion, because the inevitability of not being able to make that distance is it's like, what the fuck do you do?
It's impossible.
That hit me too. And it's also just the house being like, no, you're not going. And you're just alone there. Yeah, that was one of the few moments that I was like, oh shit. He does eventually get out. I forget how though. I think he finds another door.
No, he starts going up, and then he literally starts thinking of his family and dissociating. And by dissociating, which by the logic of some of the explanations and the annotations makes sense why this would be successful, by dissociating, he disconnects with the home, which means it couldn't really feed off his fear or anything, or the idea of distance or anything. It's because there's this whole series of, I wonder if this internal space feeds off of the fear / your mental capacity, because it goes into how Jed, his super fear that he and Wax were going to die alone and never rescued is so they end up in a really tiny room and stuff like that. And so that idea, it's almost like he found a cheat code to get out by just not thinking about it.
Yeah, it's one of these things where the space kind of conforms to their mind. We actually still have a bunch of the book to go, and we're at 2 hours. So do you guys want to just skip through the plot real quick?
The basic thing that happens is Navidson ends up coming out of the closet, and when he comes out, Karen, this entire time that Navy has been missing and gone because there's a period, she's like, I'm leaving. I'm packing up. We're going, but I need to find Navy. Tom is having an alcoholic stupor. But finally, Navy comes out, and they're getting ready to leave. And as they're packing up the house starts freaking out because there's literally a point before Navy comes back where the kids are like, what happened to your feng shui stuff, Mom? And Katie mentioned this earlier. And it's kind of this terrifying moment that the house eats the things inside it that it doesn't want in there. Things degrade very quickly, and it basically ate all of the stuff. So the idea that, because they locked the door on the house as if you could separate the space in the hallway, and by separating it you were okay as long as you were in the normal part of it, but you're not. The things disappearing shows you that it can fuck around with that stuff. And basically when Navy comes out and they start trying to leave, the house starts degrading around them, literally falling apart and collapsing. And Tom is an absolute fucking hero. Karen's in the car We're just going. And the kids are still inside the house as it's collapsing. And
Just
Tom,
Daisy, just the little
yeah,
girl.
Chad had been in there and then like got out, and because he had been outside the whole time. And Tom runs in to rescue Daisy. And there's this point where Navy is outside and there's a window, and Tom hands, as the house is like falling apart, Tom hands Daisy out to Navy out the window, and then the house literally just falls apart underneath Tom. And he starts falling.
It's worse than that.
Oh yeah,
It's
it
worse
collapses.
than that.
It closes. Yeah.
It's worse than that. The house is a jackass. The house, as Tom tries to get to the window to escape, every step he takes, it's 2 feet back and 2 feet back and 2
But
feet
not
back
just
until
that.
he's forever away.
But before that, when he hands Daisy over, the house closes on him and it breaks his hand.
That's after. Once he gets pulled away long enough, he's reaching out still.
Oh,
and
yes,
it literally,
yes.
like you said, it crushes his hand to where his bones are at. His skull is fractured, and he's crying and snotting and like coughing blood. And he says, "Oh hell!" And then he drops out from underneath.
And he falls. And then what also happens is you hear the growl, and then this black thing just comes and slashes across the screen, and Tom's body is gone. And the most affecting part for this was Chad, because there's this point where Karen is in the car and she doesn't know what's happening, and all of a sudden her son, head down, just power walks to the car, gets in and closes the door and says nothing. And the book says he has seen something he shouldn't see. And Chad had been outside the house looking at this interaction, saw what happened to Tom, and then immediately went to find his mother. And it is just such a weird, affecting scene. And also, my boy Tom dies, and he is my bestest boy, and I love him so much. And then after this, you get the Holloway tapes, because they finally have the chance to look at the Holloway tapes. I think this
Which is just him losing
his mind, and he eventually kills himself. And like the beast, the growling noise is fucking with him. And he, like, they talk about how people deal with it and how Tom dealt with it with humor. Holloway dealt with it by trying to ground him and shoot it, but also being like, I am Holloway, like that by being the persona he has crafted his whole life, he can deal with this situation, and the house breaks you down past that. Eventually, they all, like, everybody goes off. Navy doesn't go with Karen. Karen goes to her mom's house in New York. Navy spends a lot of time with Rustin and just will not, despite saying he misses Karen and the kids a lot, won't go see them. Karen is kind of having this moment where she loves Navy a lot, but she's lost her codependency.
Having lots of affairs.
Yeah, just one. There's just the one at this point.
Women.
But she has finally gotten to the point where she loves him, but she can separate herself from him and doesn't need to be there. And he has become super obsessed with the house, but studying the samples that they took of it. And there's this whole thing about it. But basically, there's this point where Rustin's like, I think we're done now, buddy. I think we turn this over to the National Geographic Discovery Channel, whoever, and we let them step in. And Navy's like, absolutely, gotcha, buddy. And then he gets drunk. He writes a letter to Karen that basically says, I'm going back to the house. Also, I love you, and I'm kind of terrible. And he goes back to the house, and he goes in
with a bike, smart,
with a bike and an electric bike,
yeah.
and a thing to carry his tent. So he's like toting along his little survival kit that he has, but he also doesn't use the fishing line to know where he's going, and he just goes into the house and goes and just is exploring with all of his video cameras and stuff. And he gets fucking lost in the house. He's been in there a month. Karen finds out about this, and she's like, fuck no. She goes back to the house. And she tries, like, she's so freaked out about what is happening.
It made me like Karen. It made me like her in the end.
I liked Karen this whole time. My girl she's so scared. She looks for the closet to find him, and it's not there. The house has gone back to a normal house where the geometry inside matches the outside geometry. Like, the architecture's gone back to being physics again, instead of breaking physics. And so she just lives in this house for a month, puttering around, trying to listen, and she hears him sometimes, a couple, like, the cameras don't hear it, but she says she hears him at a couple points. And then there's this point where she's sitting in the kids, she finds in the kids' bedroom Navy's pack, his tapes with his recordings and some other stuff, and she sits down to watch it. And it's a beautifully told scene, because this is one of the moments that kind of creeped me out. I don't know if it worked as well for you, Will, but this worked for me. She's watching the TV with Navy's tapes on it. And then as she's doing that, behind her is the wall that the kids have put all their paintings on. And the wall disappears and just opens into the back rooms just behind her. The thing she's been afraid of this whole time. And and it also is an amazing cut. Like, this is a wild fucking cut. Because she was like, you're waiting for her to finish watching the thing for her to turn around and see what's happening. And then the sentence ends incomplete. It doesn't have a period. And then we get a whole bunch of Truant stuff about his journal stuff, blah, blah, blah. But then we go to the next chapter and it begins with the sentence that doesn't have a capital. And it's because the end of that other chapter and the beginning of this one are one sentence that connect each other. And it's her realizing, because you see what happened to Navy inside the house based on the tapes. Like, it stops to tell you. What he goes through inside is crazy. It is very terrifying and kind of creepy.
Because before this, he had gotten through like a small tunnel. He got to like a tower, and you really get a sense for just how massive and nothingness this house is. And then he gets onto a platform, and there's almost nothing else on the platform. And the platform, he doesn't have any light. There's this thing about matches, and he's lighting a match and how much time that is.
Oh my God, that was so cool.
The meticulousness of it makes it really creepy that, like, this is how much time he has. And what he is he's reading a book. And the book he's reading is House of Leaves.
And he ends up burning the book so he can read the whole thing.
Because he's burning the book as he's reading it.
He has a couple of flares, and one flare literally just falls down forever and never stops. One flare floats just in general in front of him, which he uses as a lamp for a while. And then another flare falls upwards and never stops. And so he's just like in this space of like, you can almost picture like a little like square grid in like a video game sense, and him just sitting on it, and then everything else around him being nothing.
Yeah, it's really creepy.
And once he finishes the book, he starts falling. Like, there's a point where he's falling so much, but he no longer has, he's out of camera stuff, and so all you have is the video cassette of the recorded audio of him talking and about how he's falling and he's losing himself, and like he's kind of talking and then it just cuts off.
Great medium for horror. And that's what I wanted to say at the beginning of all of this, like our whole podcast thing, is that by giving us a description of a video, there's so much hidden behind the scenes that this is literally, and that's why I feel like the Navidson Record specifically, like all of us I feel agree, is the perfect like medium for horror.
I was thinking that. I was like, how would you replicate this in not this medium? Like, how would you get this? And I don't think you can.
You can't.
It really works really well.
It is. I thought about it a ton about it, like, how would you make a movie out of this book? And I think, people talk about unfilmable like movies, and this book is it. You cannot, without denying everything that makes this work because Katie's right.
You can just cut Truant out.
But I don't think the horror would work as well. I think Katie's right.
That's true.
Having the obfuscation of you reading words on a page about a visual thing that happened else, it just adds so much to it. And at the end, when Karen gets to that last bit of cassette tape, she turns, she sees that blackness behind her, and she stands at the edge of it. And there's this moment where it talks about how a bunch of academics have thought about this moment when Karen takes a step into the blackness with her fear and all of the claustrophobia, because the book this entire time has been hammering home her claustrophobia and the issues she has with this. And she loves Navy so much, but now in a less dependent way, because she chose to go away from him and not be with him and stay with him. Like there's this evolution, and she goes in to find this son of a bitch, and then it cuts to her with a pink ribbon in her hair, which is never fucking explained, guys, sitting on the front lawn with Navidson in her lap.
I don't know if there's a detail for this someplace because I skimmed it, but I wonder if it's a callback to her as a child in the well. And I wonder if the pink ribbon in her hair was actually there when she was in the well, and somehow it reattaches itself to her, but I don't remember because I don't remember the details.
The idea of her facing her childhood trauma in this moment by going to rescue him and having something greater than herself, and thus this childlike thing appears in her hair, I think is like beautiful. I think even outside of it being a specific thing, just it adds that layer, because a pink ribbon is very juvenile,
childlike,
especially for a young girl. And you basically find out that like she goes in, she's in it for like 10 minutes, she stumbles upon him, and then the house dissolves, and she's just in the front yard with Navy. And it's almost as if she came in so focused on finding him, getting out, and
Yeah.
like, and also she had lived in the house peacefully for a month by herself. And I don't want to say that the house kind of respected her, but but if you think about it, the house, her bookshelf was touching the wall again. She just lived in it, and then the house was like, "You found the key that he's alive. Go find him."
It's like what we were discussing before. It's her mindset. She came in with a goal. It was so clear cut without that fear, really, that I think that's what it happened. And I think in a way, like when she first comes in, she can't find the space, but that's because I don't know why, actually. I don't know. I don't have any explanation for that.
Bananamas said the house just wanted a friend. Yeah. So this is the thing, is that the house is needy and it kind of has a grip on you until you kind of face it. So for example, actually going back to Wax's erectile dysfunction, it's mentioned that once Navy goes back into the house, that actually kind of clears up, and it clears up a lot of the problems people were having that they got from being in the house. Because it's described as like, if you think of the house as a virus, what are the conditions of it? Like at one point, there's an academic breakdown of it, and like that's one of the things, is that once he goes in, like all of a sudden all these problems other people were having kind of stop. And so I could see that the house would see her and be like, yeah, okay, you're facing me now, you're looking at me now, you can find him.
That's a nice way of seeing it. I didn't think of it that way, but that's nice.
But I do think it ties into you, that her mentality of, I'm facing my fear to get because I think you're right with the having the single focus of I'm here to get Navy, and having that specific goal. Because the house often, like, there's this idea that the expedition where Holloway, Jed, and Wax get lost, they had a goal to get to the bottom of the stairs, and then they were supposed to go back up. But Holloway fucked up by continuing to explore, and thus changing the goal of the expedition.
Yes.
And there's an idea, like, if they'd just gone back up, done, because they came in with the goal, they did it, and that's the problem. When Navy came in his time, he didn't have a goal the last time. Like when he just came in with the bike, he did not have a goal, and thus there was no end in sight, and he was just lost. He had no specific, because the book talks about like, why the fuck did he go in? Like what was his purpose in coming back into this space? And nobody really knows it. And I think you could make the argument that he didn't have a goal and thus just ended up lost. But our girl Karen had a fucking goal. Mission, and the house was like, okay, I will fuck around with your, and that when they were running away from the house earlier, and it collapsed around them, like it's just, it's so crazy.
It's a good ending is the thing. It's like, it's a good climax to the Navidson story. And because after that too, they finally get married when they weren't going to be beforehand, and like, but he is still scarred by his time in there. And then you're stuck with Johnny Truant. And like that part's not as great, because there's a portion where he like thinks I think we mentioned this earlier, he tricks you into thinking he's getting better, and that like, oh, I am blah, 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 blah. And then he's like, psych, I didn't, I just got worse again.
Yeah. And it's done in a, like, it's almost as if he wrote a journal, because the idea is he did write a journal, and you're getting his journal entries, and they're also given to you out of order. And so it's this really weird section about him going to find the house in Virginia, which connects to the idea that he's gotten to the point where he thinks the house is real, despite the fact that he knows the Navidson Record does not exist at all. But Katie, do you have the last page?
You mean the alternate thing?
Ending, yeah, the alternate last page.
Okay, so this haunted me because I saw this before the end of the book, and I thought that's what it ended like before I reread it. So there's this just like random page in the back along with all the appendices, and there's like these papers here, right? And it even has a diagram of the thing I'm about to describe, which really freaked me out more than anything. And again, the verb is what freaks me out. Now, you're going to have to forgive me. This is very blurry.
Yeah, I didn't read this part at all.
And we don't know who wrote this. Except for I'm assuming it's the actual author of the book, obviously. But it's also, could it be Zampano? Who knows? Or Zampano. It says, perhaps I will alter the whole thing. Kill both the children. Murder is a better word. Chad scrambling to escape, almost making it to the front door where Karen waits, until a corner in the foyer suddenly leaps forward and hews the boy in half. At the same time, Navidson, by the kitchen, reaches for Daisy, only to arrive a fraction of a second too late, his fingers finding air, his eyes scratching after Daisy as she falls to her death. Let both parents experience that. Let their narcissisms find a new object to wither by. Douse them in infanticide. Draw them in blood.
So that's not the one I was talking about. Because that's that's the alternate way to end them fleeing from the house, but not the actual end of the book.
Wait, you want the actual end of the book?
It's just the page right before that page. No, the alternate end of
Is
the
it
book.
really just the page right before that
Yep.
page? In the end, it was the dream, not the dreamers, that quote-unquote dissolved. The way out was without. They found themselves on the front lawn. Oh yeah, this part. I see what you're saying. Birch trees standing over them like protective sentinels, alive in the peal of nature as lights flickered on in the neighborhood homes. A dog barked and birds dared to race the imminence of dusk. The only ominous note was a truck by the ambulance driver who took Navidson and Karen to the hospital. Quote, "It was late afternoon, nice, real peaceful, and we got him on the stretcher and loaded up, and she started to cry a lot, sort of coming out of the shock of it. I seen that happen a lot. It was real intense, he being about to die and she crying and all, so I shouldn't have noticed anything else, but I kept hearing this banging. Over and over, bang, bang, bang. So finally I looked over to the house, and sure enough, their screen door was slamming open and shut. I forgot about it until I'm driving back to the hospital. See, I told you it was nice out. Well, that was true. Real nice. There weren't no breeze to speak of. The trees weren't swaying, nothing, just still. But that screen door was being open and shut like we were in the middle of a darn hurricane. A few weeks later, I drove by the house, but the door was closed and they'd started putting up that big fence. The house was taken off the market. An 8-foot fence built around the property line with no trespassing signs posted everywhere. Apparently, graffiti now marks the sign, and vandals have broken all the windows. Following the release of the film, someone tried to burn down the house, and it never caught fire. The house still stands on Ash Street Lane. Karen still owns it. It is not for sale. As she warns, there is nothing there. Be careful.
The image of that screen door just banging as the paramedics take them away, and the ending of "there is nothing there, be careful" is just, because that's not how the actual book ends. Like, it is because it's there. Like, the author is like, haha, I'm gonna put this page here, read it.
Yeah.
And so it is an ending, but that's not how the
happy ending.
The text, and it's just so, because it changes it from the house being nice, letting them go, to the house being like, you escaped. Like, it's so.
But you know what, dude? No, what creeps me the most out is that verb, hewn in half. If you picture that child being literally sliced in half and like his meat sloughing to the side, that is some nasty imagery.
One thing I didn't mention about the academia stuff is that I actually thought it was really funny, and it's so pitch perfect, like the titles of all of the works and the ways they analyze the Navidson Record they're just so subtly funny if you've ever read any academia or stuff like that.
It is. It's hysterical. It speaks of intimate knowledge of academia, but such. And there was almost moments where, like, my hackles raised, where I was like, now this is too much, Danielewski. You've gone too far. And I had to, like, smooth down my academic hackles at getting insulted at how he treated academia. But it really is the ways academic titles are sometimes. They'll have, like, a flippant, like,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah, there's supposed to be like a little bit of a witticism.
yeah, and then the text itself is so dry, but like the title is like witty,
And the way they overanalyze certain things and certain elements, and they're like, at one point there's something about like, oh, it's actually a phallic shape. It's interesting that they have to go into a non-phallic, into a woman, and that's why Karen never goes in, and like Zapanya's like, that's really stupid, and like it's just it's so it adds a level of funniness to the text that I'm not sure everyone gets, but I really appreciate it.
So the last thing we get from Truant is and the crazy thing that makes me think it's not actually like it's it's weird. It happens in that section where it's a diary, like it's his journal entries, and it's where he went to Seattle and had doctor friends who helped him get better, and then he's like, haha, joke's on you, that doesn't fucking exist. But then the last section of it, he was like, my doctor friend in Seattle told me this story about a mother, and the story is that this mom gives birth, and her child is in the NICU, and it has holes in its brain and it cannot live if not on life support. And the mom stays up for 3 days without sleeping, closing her eyes, eating, drinking, nothing, just talking to and holding the baby and just pouring. And like people hear what she's saying and they don't understand it exactly. Like they hear bits of it.
But it sounds a whole lot like Pelafina.
She just talks to the baby and talks to the baby. And then at one point she says to the doctor, okay, I think I'm ready for you to take him off life support. And the doctor's like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is the process we're going to do. And they start the first part. And then she asks for a moment and she goes up to the baby and she kisses him on his head. And she goes, okay, you can go now. And the baby just dies. The heart monitor just flatlines, and the baby is dead. And it is the end of Truant's stuff that he kind of tells you. It's like the last big significant scene. And you're kind of left with, was that Pelafina? Was Truant never alive? Is this her? And there's two ways, because I was reading people kind of talking about this scene at the end, and some people saying they don't think it's real because they said it was the doctor from Seattle who didn't exist. But it was the doctor from Seattle who didn't exist for Truant, but could have existed for Pelafina. And so you don't know. You don't know. Mm-hmm. And also, it just connects back to what I said before, where this book loves to play with what is real or not real. Because again, the Navidson Record does not exist in this world that the book is written in, or at least that Truant exists in. And so the book really likes playing with what is actually real. What do you actually get to believe? How do you interact with this piece of media? And that's just another one. Because again, you can look at that and be like, it was Pelafina the whole time.
I don't have a definitive answer as to what's real or what isn't with that ending. And I don't think you're really supposed to. I think it's supposed to just be something you explore.
I don't feel like there's like a canon. You know, like that's the way you're supposed to read it or whatever. As a final note, just from me quoting anything, there's an untitled fragment in the poetry section, and it's one of my favorite things in the entire book besides the artist thing. And I really like how it's basically the thesis for the entire book, as well as like for all aspects of the book, including like life, being alive, dying, schizophrenia, building up what is real and what is not. And it says, little solace comes to those who grieve when thoughts keep drifting as walls keep shifting, and this great blue world of ours seems a house of leaves, moments before the wind. So, like, I think it's really beautiful, the concept of, like, that poem alone actually brought together the title to the plot of everything together for me, because I feel like, again, it's the thesis where it's like everything you can construct and believe to be your home is nothing but the autumn of time. And, like, death is only constant. So
yeah, and that kind of ties into what she was worried about with the suffering on her child, and also what Navidson was worried about in terms of his like existential terror.
Yeah,
because we didn't even go into the whole thing about
or
how
Delisle.
Like we didn't even go into some stuff. I enjoyed this book, but I don't really think a lot of the things it does. Again, this book to me is two books, and one of them I really liked, and the other I really disliked. And so, like, the author has talked about how he doesn't. He's gotten movie deals for it, but it's always they just want to adapt one part of the book, and he doesn't want that. He wants to it to be all parts. And I am with the movie studios on this one. I think there should just be a movie of the Navidson Record. That to me is like so much more interesting than whatever's going on with Johnny Truant.
It would be like a shitty version of the Butterfly Effect if they tried to do that.
If they tried to do both portions
all
of the book, or just...
if they tried to do the whole book, it would be like a weird version of the Butterfly Effect that's even more disjointed.
Yeah, I just don't think it would work. So, I mean, I think this book, and again, I almost wish I could read some other stuff he's done, because from what I understand, some of his other stuff is not great, so I'm not that interested in doing it. But like, he's such a talented writer when it comes to the actual writing, like prose and story and character. characters. It's just like his version of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I don't like, and I don't like that it's attached to this otherwise really cool haunted house.
And I agree. As much as I grew to enjoy the Truant portions and how you can connect it to the other aspects, the heart, because as you saw, outside of a few things, I mainly just talked about what happened in the Navidson Record and then the academic things, and I didn't go into all of the academic cutaways that happened in the book, but that is such a compelling read, and it is, because Truant's plot itself is like kind of non-existent, and honestly it would take a whole separate video to talk about all the shit that happens with Truant, and it isn't like the heart of the story, because again, like that point at which Karen goes in and I'm like, oh man, this is a motherfucking love story, bro. And it just like it just works, and the most impactful moments are that, or specifically about Truant's childhood. Like you find out about when he finally starts telling you about his foster dad, that is horrifying, and we don't like it. Or the dog. The Pekingese, I was really...
God, that was horrifying.
That was so rough.
I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting it to happen.
The book got me. I thought...
I was like, what the hell? Honestly, out of everything in this book, I'm going to be honest with the two of you. Now that you've reminded me, that character was the most terrifying creature in the book.
She was unsettling, and I was never quite sure how that tied quite back into the house and the Minotaur and all of that, but that part was pretty crazy.
This is a big ass book. It's like the Bible.
It lasts forever.
It's not a fun read. It is once you get to the Navidson stuff, of course that's the cheese on the hook. That's the little like like any of you Americans who have seen that dumb insurance commercial with the old man with the fishing line. Oh, you got to be quicker than that. It's what keeps you going. But this was like reading Dante's The Inferno, where I had to steel myself to get through it. It is not fun to read. However, by reading it, you will have earned a very unique experience. So for those of you who like to torture yourself and like what you get, like for example, if you were like my husband wanting to go into the SEAL program where you go and get beat the shit up by other people just so that way you can be a POW, if you're that kind of person, read the book. So if you're a masochist.
I kind of agree, where there was this one point where I was talking about the book so much and my boyfriend goes, you must really like it. You're very passionate about it. And I went, I don't think I like it. I don't know. I don't know if I like it, but I'm fascinated by it. It's like this car crash of things that I can't look away from. And just, I think about a lot. Like there was a point where I was in bed and I was just sitting there and then I opened my eyes and it was just dark. And it's that fuzzy kind of darkness where there's just enough light that you can almost see the light particles. And so everything is that fuzzy kind of gray. And I was like, this is what the house is like. And for a second, I was almost like, what if it just opened up? And I was suddenly like, having that kind of thing. And like, that's how much this thing just got into my head. But it is work. When I finally finished it this morning at 8:30, I ran to my boyfriend and I was like, I finished it. And he was like, it was the never ending story. He's like, I feel like you've been reading it forever.
When I finished it yesterday in the car, I literally went like this. So I was like this. And then I had flipped to the beginning to look at a reference and then went like, for the love of God, I never want to touch this book again. And then I touched it a lot since then.
It's a book that a couple of people in the comments have said you're not, Chris M says, it's not the sort of book one likes. You could at most appreciate it. Yeah, I think that's true. I like one half of it and I dislike the other half. So, I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily... The other thing I realized is I just read books in text so much slower than I listen to them. And so we're never doing that for a book again, pretty much.
It was hard with this one because it was work, having to make yourself sit down and read it. And because it's so long, you had to dedicate enough time to try read a chunk of it, because like I've been reading a lot of books with my eyes lately, and I can power through it, but a lot of them have that readability where you're like excited to do it, but because this book has so many stop-start points, whether it's the academic portion stopping the Navidson story, whether it's Truant stopping the Navidson story, whether it's telling you something out of order in the Navidson story, there's so many points where the book stops you, and then you have to like psych yourself back up, like you're like, okay, we're gonna get in. We're gonna read for an hour and 45 minutes.
It's kind of like reading what is it called? Aragon Eldest. It's like reading Eldest when you get to his brother's parts and you're like, I could not give less of a hell about his brother's story. Please give me back the weird naked elf stuff. And at that point. And but yeah, no. I would say for anybody interested in reading it and doesn't want to go through that experience, just read the Navidson Record stuff and you'd enjoy it. I'm sure there's probably someone online that like cut all of it. But also, don't read it digitally. I started reading it digitally up to page 150, and I was like, this is the worst experience I've ever had.
There's no way to do this book outside of just buying it and reading it with giant balls.
I don't know. I think you could. The rotate button would make it easier on a PDF.
No, it's annoying.
Of this. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. We love you, our parasocial darlings.
Bye.